Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our next training on measurement. So we're going to get right into it today. This is the measurement training. And what is measurement? So what are we doing when we measure? We are applying quantitative labels to describe and differentiate objects and natural events. And when I think of the word quantitative, I look at that N very strongly in the word quantitative. And can anyone tell me what that might prompt me to think about? That starts with an N too? Number. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, totally right. Number. So when I think of quantitative, I'm looking at that N and I think a number, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to be taking behaviors and kind of assigning a number to it in a nutshell. Okay? So let's get into it. So these are the 3 steps in measuring in measurement in ABA. And we're going to be really focusing on step number 3. But the first one, we're going to identify the behaviors to be measured. And we talked a lot about this in our FBA training. So the first step is we're going to identify behaviors. And what behaviors are we going to identify?
Whatever the behaviors they're displaying.
The behaviors they're displaying that are important to the family, to the stakeholder, important to the VIP themselves, and society at large, right? So those socially valid behaviors, right? The behaviors that people are interested in changing, right? We're going to define the behaviors in observable, measurable terms. We're going to think about our behavioral dimension of ABA that dictates that we should be observable and measurable with our definitions. That a stranger off the street can come in and record upon this data with 0 problems, because that's how strong our definition is, how unambiguous our definition is. It only has one meaning. And number 3, we're going to select an appropriate observation and data recording method. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to be selecting a data recording method. Okay. So these are the main recording methods and continuous. And what do I mean by a continuous recording method? It's ongoing. It's ongoing. It never stops. Yeah, you got to be quicker than that, Brandon, with Jackie here. So with continuous recording, there's never a break in recording. We need to make sure that we are constantly recording upon this behavior if we use one of these methods. What's an important consideration when we're talking about someone that needs to focus 100% of their energy on recording? What do we need to think about? And it starts with an R. They're reliable. Of course, we want it to be reliable, but they're resources to record, right? We need to make sure they have the ability to record. If this person were asking to record a continuous method, we need to make sure that they can spend the whole time doing this observation, that they're not going to get distracted, that they don't have other responsibilities in the room that they need to focus on. For instance, a teacher or a staff that's in a group. Maybe they're in a group of 1 to 8 here on the day program floor. A continuous method of recording might be very difficult for them to do. And if you presented them with a continuous method, they're probably not going to be recording reliably upon it. Right? So we need to consider the resources, and that's one way we could determine what to choose here, what data recording method to choose. These are the continuous methods that should be chosen if possible. If we have a one-on-one worker, might be a good idea to use a continuous method. If we have a behavioral worker with them or a behavior tech with them, we can choose this continuous method. And it is the better thing to choose this if possible. This is the better way to go to go forward with this. So what are the continuous methods? Rate or frequency. And a lot of times I see rate or frequency, they'll show me the count. Someone will show me the count, but that's only half of it. The number of responses per unit of time. So the mathematical formula here is count over time is how you figure out rate or frequency. Duration is another continuous method. The amount of time from the onset to the end point of a response. So how long does this behavior occur for? Latency is another method, is a measurement of the elapsed time between the onset of a stimulus, an antecedent stimulus, and the subsequent response. And I often give the example for this one, a fire drill. How long, do we hear the fire alarm till when the person actually engages in vacating the building? Really important. We don't want a long latency in that case. In inner response time, or IRT, it's a measurement of the amount of time that elapsed between two consecutive instances of a behavior and of the same behavior. So if we're interested in someone raising their hand too often, we might do the IRT and say, okay, they're raising their hand every 15 seconds. We don't mind they're raising their hand, but we want to reduce the IRT. We want to make that smaller. And we're going to talk about this a little later, but the idea is where do you want to choose the recording method? Where do you want to improve? Where do you want to take this behavior in the future? And that's what I like to think about to help me choose a measurement. All right, any questions about continuous methods? And remember, it's all about, a lot of this is about the resources of the recorder. If we're asking a parent to record and they have to take care of another person in the house, they have to make dinner, they have a lot of other responsibilities, this continuous method might not be ideal. Any questions on continuous methods? All right, let's continue, please. So the discontinuous methods, so these are ones that do what, do you think? If continuous, we always record. What do you think happens at discontinuous? Yes, we could take a break from recording. So these might be a better option for people that don't have a lot of resources, that don't have a lot of time to record, who have a million other things to do. This could be the method to use. Whole interval recording is one. And whole interval recording, and we're going to do the same kind of procedure for each one. We're going to split all these into equal intervals. So maybe we have, the research says 30 seconds to 2-minute intervals, but we've done longer than that, half-hour intervals, hour intervals, and we're going to split the time into intervals, equal intervals. And we're going to put a yes. If in whole interval, we want the behavior to occur for what? Look at the first word. The whole time, the whole interval, we want this behavior to occur for. And if it occurs for the whole interval, we're going to put yes. And if it doesn't occur for one moment, we're going to put no. We should use whole interval recording for behaviors that are looking, not always, but we want to choose whole interval for behaviors we're looking to strengthen. Because we want to see this behavior happen for the whole interval. Sitting at a desk, engaged in your work. Maybe we're working with someone at a job site, like Deanna does. We want this person to engage in work for the whole interval. As soon as they stop, they get up, we would put no in that interval, and then we could stop recording until the next interval begins.
Is that your nonchalant way of telling me I should be doing full interval?
No. I just thought of that behavior.
I mean, it's actually a really good idea. It's a great idea.
Okay, yeah, so it could be a good idea. And how easy is it for the staff to record upon it? Because they just have to put a yes if they did it for the whole interval, or a no that they got up and walked around. Right? We want that behavior to occur for the whole interval. And if it doesn't for one moment, maybe I shouldn't use the word moment, 1 second, right? I'm glad Chelsea got that joke. Then we would put no. Okay, and it's typically for behaviors we want to strengthen. Not always, but usually it is. So that could be if you're taking a test or a quiz and you see a skill acquisition behavior that they're discussing that's of interest, you might, and they're asking you what measurement to use there, you might default to whole interval because that is a behavior we'd like to see for the whole interval. Partial interval is very similar to it. Partial interval is we're going to split the day or the time into equal intervals. And this is typically targeted for behaviors for weakening. And if the behavior occurs for one moment in the interval, we're going to put yes, that it happened. And we're done recording until the next interval happens. So this is typically for behavior reduction strategies. Partial interval recording is another name for a scatter plot that we talked about in another training. And what are the advantages of a scatter plot? What is it showing us? I mean, not everything. Yeah, it's showing us behaviors. And what about the behaviors? Yeah, right, when they're occurring. So when I could use partial interval recording for not only recording data, but to show me as a clinician when behaviors are occurring so that I could pinpoint my service and pinpoint my times to go and see this VIP. So I could use partial interval recording for not only data recording, but also for finding out what times behaviors are more likely to happen. And all I'm going to do is split my time up into equal intervals. And if the behavior occurs during that interval, I'm going to put yes. And if it doesn't occur, I'm going to put a no. And if the behavior occurs one time in the interval, I'm done recording until the next interval starts. So you can see that it's not super reliable because if the behavior occurred multiple times during that interval, we would only see one instance of that behavior occurring. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well enough for you guys? And then momentary time sampling. The observer records that the behavior is occurring at the end of the interval. So we're going to split the time up in intervals. And this is for someone that has little to no resources. And maybe we tell them, hey, set a little alarm in your pocket to like vibrate to go off. And at the end of the interval, this device is going to go off. And you're going to look at this person. And are they engaging in the behavior in that moment? And if they are, you're going to put a yes. And if not, you're going to put a no. And momentary time sampling is used for people that really don't have much time to record at all. They don't have a lot of resources to record. No problem. Come on in. Welcome.
Hi.
So does anyone have any questions about discontinuous methods? And what are we thinking about with discontinuous? When do we use it over continuous? When someone doesn't have the what? The time, the resources to record reliably, making it easier for them. And hopefully making this process easier, we're going to get better recording. We're going to actually see this person engaging in data recording behaviors that we'd like to see. Okay. These are some other, so how do I put the discontinuous measures into a chart, right? We have intervals that happen, behaviors happen in, we have behavior intervals that the behaviors haven't happened in. Well, I could use a percentage. I could say a percentage of intervals. For instance, say we have 10 intervals we're recording on for discontinuous methods. If the behavior occurs in 5 of them, what percentage can I pull from that day? 50%. And that's what would go on. Thank you. Yes, that's what would go on my graph. That is what number I would put on my graph. And trials to criterion is a measure of the number of response opportunities needed to achieve a predetermined level of performance. And we don't see that too often in our work. Let's continue, Shay. This is another method of recording. It's called permanent product. And permanent product is a measure of behavior after it occurred by observing the effects the behavior produced on the environment. So when I met Keystone Monday Street. I don't need to sit there, and the workers don't sit there to see how many pieces were made, right? They could come when? At the end of the day, and see how many pieces were made. And then they could pay that person accordingly. Here's the broom maker. I thought it was Tim Allen from the corner of my eye, and it's not, though. It looks kind of like him. And this is a broom maker. And I don't need the supervisor doesn't need to come in and sit there and watch him make all his brooms all day to ensure he's engaging in that behavior. He could come at the end of the shift and see how many brooms he made. So it could be an effective strategy for what kind of behaviors? Behaviors that occur where? Starts with a P, private, right? Because in public, I could just record probably. For behaviors that occur in private, right? Or occurs when no one's around to record upon them. I may look to see the effects on the environment to help determine if that behavior occurred or not. Right? We have someone that rips shirts when they're in their room. We had this before bed, right? I don't need to stand there and watch them while they're getting ready for bed to determine if they ripped their shirt or not. I could come in later and see their shirt has been ripped. Does anyone have any other examples?
Well, you made me think of Robbie downstairs. He does the
Yeah.
same thing, but in the morning.
Yeah, ripping shirts. So I don't need to stand there. Like we know Robbie ripped at night or whatever throughout the night if we come in his room and a shirt is ripped the next day. Right? Any other examples?
If somebody wet their bed at night, we don't have to be all night watching them. We can just go see in the morning when they wake up and see if their bed is wet.
That's a great point, Diego. Wetting the bed, right? We could just see the effect on the environment. Very nice. Any questions about permanent product? Definitional measure. So these are measures if we're more interested in what the behavior looks like. And there's a topographical or the physical form of what the behavior looks like. And I have a picture of Shaq. You guys know Shaq, right? He's a great dude. Really great dude. And what was he notoriously bad at? Free throws. Exactly right. He was very bad at basketball. He was notoriously bad at free throws, right? So we might, to teach Shaq, we might have a free throw definition in our behavior support plan. You need to stand at the line. You know, Shaq will stand at the line, 2 feet facing forward, bounce the ball twice, whatever that free throw looks like for Shaq. And we're interested in the form or what the behavior looks like because we know when someone shoots the correct way, they're much more likely to make the shot. So we might be interested in a topographical definition for Shaq. I often think of like bike riding. You know, it's like there's like a form to ride a bike and balance on a bike, how you should sit, how you should balance. We might be interested in a topographical definition for that. Penmanship is another one in school, right? Hold the pencil like this at the very end and, you know, those kind of things. So we might be more interested in topographical measurement or magnitude. And I have a picture of a star graph here to show that's how they classify stars many times. Right, Aaron? Yeah. I remember you're into space. So that's how we could classify a behavior too, with the magnitude or intensity of a behavior, right? We might record, oh, this person had a tantrum, and have the person record, you know, it's a subjective measure kind of, because we'd be like, oh, like at a 1 to 5, how intense was this tantrum? And we could look for a reduction in intensity as we're maybe looking at a reduction in duration or frequency as well. Any questions about any of these? All right, let's please continue. So this is an important slide. So how do we pick what measurement dimension to use? We have all these methods. How do we pick which one to use? Well, we're going to think about what dimension of the behavior that we're interested in changing. So we're going to think about where things are now and where do we want to take things. And we'll give some examples. Becky works with the VIP about teeth brushing, right? And this person brushes their teeth for far too long compared to norm teeth brushing. And typically we might have the opposite problem, brushing little to none at all. But in this case, we have a behavior that occurs for far too long. And it's not a bad behavior that we would want to get rid of. What method of recording might we be interested in using for this? Because it extends through time. A continuous method, yes. And what continuous method would that be? Duration, right? And what would we look to do with this duration? Reduce it, yes. Lessen it, right? So duration would be great to use in this example, and we know where we want to take things. We know kind of what things are like now and what to choose now and to lessen it, right? And I would first come in and do a baseline recording where I'm going to see where things are right now for maybe 3 to 5 days and see where the things are now. This assessment piece is very important to our work. And then I'm going to come up with interventions through talking to a VCBA and my own knowledge, my own toolbox, and talking to my team members. And I'm going to implement these strategies to see if there's a change in that duration. See if there's a change in that dependent variable that we're interested in changing. So think about where you want to take things. And that could help you determine what data recording method to use. Think about if the observer has adequate resources to collect the data we're presenting. Right? It's so important because sometimes we fall into a trap where we present a method that's way too cumbersome for the recorder. So we have to know this recorder pretty good to know what their daily life is like, what they're responsible for during this recording method. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have a one-on-one staff or you have a behavior worker that has a lot of time with this VIP, go for continuous. Go do it. You know what I mean? If someone, has no knowledge about ABA, has difficulties understanding kind of what we're trying to show them, doesn't have a lot of resources to record, you might not choose a method that's very cumbersome, right? Because you're not going to get good data recording and you're probably going to lose buy-in. Make it as simple as possible and tailored to the person who's collecting the data. I'm going to make it so simple for this person to record, right? And other methods of recording that we use during the assessment is ABC data recording. And I often think of checklists. I also think of a narrative recording where I give them a notebook and they just write about what happened. Other methods we can use to make it as simple and easier. If I have someone in my office for supervision and they're talking to me that someone's recording, I'm instantly thinking that it's too complex for the recorder. It's too tough. This person doesn't have the resources. So we need to make it easier for them. And we're going to use the flow chart. What's the flow chart, you might ask? Let's take a look at it. It's in that article. I sent out this article. It's a great read. It talks a lot about selecting measurement. And there's also a flow chart in here, right here, that will help guide you to the right recording method that you need to use. The OG. So this is a form. If I'm really stuck into what I need to use to record here, I can follow this flow chart and it will help me come to a good decision about what I should record upon. And we could go through it. Is the problem behavior observable? Yes or no? So hopefully yes, to make it easier. Is the problem behavior discrete and countable? So can we count it? Yes. Are observer resources sufficient to count each instance of the behavior? Okay, we'll say yes again. Can the behavior occur at any time? and we could say yes, and then we're going to keep going. Is one of the following behavior dimensions the primary, important, or secondary measure for designing treatment? And if we said no, we would default to event recording. And event recording is just another method to say rate, or in this case, over their percentage of opportunities. Or yes, duration, latency, and intensity. So this form can help you decide what data recording method to use if you're really in trouble. Any questions about this? And it also comes with a lot of other information in this article that you find very important in your work.
And you'll have this on Teams?
It's already sent on Teams.
Already on there?
It's already sent on Teams for your reading enjoyment and your future references. Download it to your computer so you could bring it up when you need it. Any questions about this? All right, let's continue. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to use this information for. So we have a number now. We have a number that goes along with the data, whether it's duration, whether it's rate, whether it's latency, whether it's a partial interval recording percentage data that we have. What are we going to use this information for? Well, we're going to use it to put on our graph. We're going to use it for our graphing. And we're not going to talk about how to make a graph today, but we're going to talk about what the graph should look like. And you know, a lot of people are scared on it using Excel, for instance, which you shouldn't be. Practice it, you get better as you go. But we'll buy you graphing paper, and you could do handwritten graphs if you choose to do that. Yes, that's old school. That's OG. We'll get you a ruler. We'll get you a ruler, and you could.
What were you gonna say, Diego?
I like that. It's a lot easier.
That's from our day.
It is easy. I mean, whatever method is easier for you guys, right? The same thing I'm doing for my VIPs and their caretakers, I'm doing for you guys. Make whatever kind of graphs easier for you guys. If Excel's scary, we'll get you a graphing notebook. When you get that data recording, put it on your graph that you make. And we're going to talk about what goes into a graph in a minute. But the first thing I wanted to get is this baseline phase. I want to see how things are now. I want to see how things are now so that when I implement my intervention, I could see a change. So my first step, anytime I'm presented with a problem behavior when I'm working with the VIP, my first step isn't to delve into interventions. My first step isn't to give this person interventions. And I was at a doctor's recently, and I really appreciated this doctor because they did a thorough assessment before and it was a chiropractor, before they jumped in to the intervention. And I've been other chiropractors that would just jump. I would come in and they would crack my back with no assessment needed. One size fits all. And that's not the right way, guys. The right way is a proper assessment first. And during this assessment period, we are finding out baseline information. We are recording on how things are happening now. And this doesn't have to be a lengthy time. Important to determine a baseline so we can compare our interventions. We're going to look at that more. Baseline should not last long. General rule is 3 data points, so maybe 3 days of recording before we implement the intervention. Sometimes it's a little bit lengthy depending on how many units our people have, how often we see them. You know, I've seen up to a week, I've seen up to a month baseline period. And we also want to consider when baseline data appears to be stable or is going in the opposite direction, the intervention, that's what I mean by IV, should be implemented more immediately. So when I see a problem, and the baseline period is really important, and we talked about this in the last training, because what if I had a baseline period that the behavior is already trending in the right direction? Right? The behavior is already improving with natural processes. What won't that require? An intervention from us. Mission accomplished. And all we did was record baseline data. because the behavior is already going in the direction that we'd like. So we don't need a special intervention. Without this baseline period, we would not know that we didn't need an intervention. If the behavior is trending in the opposite direction or is maintaining a problem behavior, that should indicate to us that an intervention is needed. If a self-injurious behavior or another harmful behavior, we cannot wait for stability in the data and should implement an IV immediately or an intervention immediately to reduce any chance of injury. So this might be the only time where I would jump ahead during the assessment period and give the person strategies about how to help with this behavior due to the severe nature of a self-injurious behavior, physically aggressive behavior, property destruction behavior. I may jump ahead and give them interventions right away to help them reduce this problem and not let this problem continue. And please see our antecedent strategy training and our differential reinforcement strategy training now on YouTube for information about interventions and what you can use. Any questions about this baseline phase? Super important. When I go into any case, this is the first thing I'm doing is getting baseline data. And then we have the intervention phase. And this is kind of what a graph could look like for us. We're going to use this phase to compare to the baseline phase. Should see a change in the data almost immediately after we put an intervention into place and dictates our treatment moving forward. So if we look at this graph, it's an A-B design where we have a baseline phase, which is A, and an intervention phase, which is B. And we have hitting and biting. The black is hitting, the gray is biting. And we have a baseline phase where this person recorded 3 instances of this behavior happening over 3 different days, January 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. During this time, they developed a behavior support plan. I mean, typically it doesn't happen this fast for us. But they come up with a behavior support plan. They go and train all the stakeholders, all the VIPs on how to carry out this plan. And then they continue to record on the same behaviors. And this is the baseline phase. And here we have a phase change line. And the phase change line signals that something is different with the environment for this person. In this case, it's our intervention. In other cases, it could be any change this person's experiencing. What could be another change outside our scope of practice that we might draw a phase change line for? A medication change. So when I have a VIP that's medication has changed, I would draw a phase change line in the data to see how that environmental medicine or chemical is impacting these behaviors. So it doesn't have to be our intervention why we draw a phase change line, but any intervention. Any kind of change in the environment. And when they go back, for instance, if we're thinking about that medication example again, if we recorded upon this and presented this to the psychiatrist, what important data would he get compared to what the doctor normally says? How are you feeling? How do you feel things have been since our last appointment, right? Now we have concrete data to show the doctor that they can make intervention changes based on. Right? And a good doctor would appreciate this kind of data just like we would, because it's going to help dictate their interventions just like it would help dictate our interventions. If the data doesn't change, this is a very nice, right? We implement interventions and we see these problem behaviors fade away. So it tells me that we were right about the function. It tells me that our interventions could be the reason why these behaviors are reducing. Without a reversal, it's hard to really say that's 100% accurate. A reversal design. Does anyone have any questions about this? This is what your graph should look like. All right, let's continue. Continue, please. So I did send this as well in another document. If you could bring it up, Shad, just to make it bigger. So this is something that we made. The pictures from the Cooper book. Oh, that's it. Maybe it's on. Is it on your other screen, Shay? That's it. Yeah. So this is a great graph, and it has numbers next to the graph, and it signals. Thanks for printing that out.
Yeah.
And the numbers correspond with a point below on the table. These are the 7 things that should be included in your chart or your graph. And this is an example of a reversal design. They have a baseline, and we normally wouldn't do a reversal design. If we made success with our behavior support plan, it's a real hard sell to explain to the family that we want to reverse our intervention and go back to baseline phase. So we normally would never do this, but in the experimental branch of ABA, this is how they do things to prove that what they've done has been the reason why the behavior changed. No other reason. Okay? So we have a baseline phase. This is, and look at what we have here. We have a horizontal axis. So the axis around the bottom is an x-axis. And the x-axis is typically a measurement of what in ABA? Starts with a T. What was that? Time, yeah. The x-axis is a measurement of time. Sessions, days, whatever. That should be on the bottom of your graph, the horizontal line. Number 2 is the y-axis. And most often represents what? The dependent variable or the behavior we're interested in changing. So that should be on the left side of your graph. In this case, we are interested in laps. Laps walk per session. And obviously we want this person to walk more laps. So we have the x-axis, which is sessions, and the y-axis, which is laps. Number 3 is the axis label. A brief description of the dimensions represented by scale along each axis. So here it is, sessions, and over here, laps. Without those numbers, we don't really know what they mean. So we need to have a label there to show that, and all this stuff is done on Excel very easily. Or you could do it, like we said, like Diego wants you to do, on a notebook that we'll purchase for you, free of charge.
Yeah.
A condition.
I know what I'm getting you for Christmas, Diego.
Yeah, don't steal my idea. A condition change line. So this is the phase change line we talked about. Let's scroll back up, please. These are the phase change lines. Indicate there's been some change in the environment. Then we have the, see, I shouldn't need these, right? So the next thing we have is the condition change labels. And scroll up. And the condition change labels are these labels to indicate what has changed. In this case, BL stands for baseline. Then we have the intervention we're using in this case is token reinforcement. And we look to see that it has changed. Then they reverse, they take away the token reinforcement and see where the behavior is. And then they reintroduce it to see how the behavior has been impacted by this change. And that's why many times we were like, hey, we shouldn't change a million things all at once. If possible, let's change one thing at a time to see how that environmental change impacts these behaviors. And it's important in our declaration page that we review. It outlines this point very drastically, where it says any change in treatment should be reviewed with us immediately. So we know to draw this phase change line. Hey, they started counseling. Hey, they started a new medication. Hey, they started to see a new doctor. Any of these things in your mind should trigger in your head phase change line. Number 6 are data points. Right? And this is just the number that I'm going to put on my graph. So in this case, this is pointing to this data point, which looks like a 30. Right? So it's kind of like where my data is for that day. 7 are data lines, and they'll just the lines that are connecting two data points. Oh, I'm sorry, there's 8. There's 8 things, not 7. I don't know why there's 7 there. But whatever. 7 is, yeah, it's missing those data lines. 8 is this, which I don't see very often, but a little kind of summary of what the graph is all about. Laps walked per session for each participant. Triangles indicate days in which the participant arrived late to the walking session. So that could explain this outlier here. Your graph should be set up the same exact way as this. Any questions about this process? Does it make sense what we're doing here? All right, let's continue. That might be the last slide. I'm not sure. It is. So just show that reference at the very end. So I got this information from the Cooper book, of course. Do you guys have any final questions for me? Okay, well, I really appreciate your participation. If you have any questions, please let me know.